Parked 1:10:47 in the morning, the 19th of June, 1944, 100 miles west of Guam in the western Pacific Ocean. In the Combat Information Center of the aircraft carrier USS Lexington, a radar operator was staring at a plan position indicator scope. 69 unknown blips had just appeared on the screen. They were 130 miles to the west, closing fast. The radar operator called the bridge on the intercom. Vice Admiral Marc Mitscher, 57 years old, commander of Task Force 58, listened to the report. Then he said two words. He said, "Hey Ruby." It was an old carnival phrase from his youth. It meant everybody get into this fight right now, as fast as you can. Within 12 minutes, 220 F6F Hellcat fighters were airborne from 8 American aircraft carriers, climbing hard for 25,000 feet. 600 miles to the west, on the flight deck of the Japanese aircraft carrier Taiho, Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, 57 years old, was watching his second wave of aircraft form up. He believed his pilots were about to catch the Americans unprepared. He believed his aircraft could hit the American carriers from 400 miles out while remaining outside American strike range. He believed the American fighters were busy attacking Guam. He was wrong about all three things. Over the next 24 hours, the American pilots flying those Hellcats would shoot down more than 300 Japanese aircraft. 2 American submarines would sink 2 of Ozawa's aircraft carriers, one of them the newest fleet carrier in the Imperial Japanese Navy. 3 Japanese warship captains would go down with their ships, and approximately 645 Japanese naval airmen would be dead by sunset on the 20th of June. The American pilots would lose about 30 aircraft. The American pilots would nickname the battle before the sun set on the first day. An Iowa boy named Ziggy Neff, coming back to the USS Lexington that evening with his fuel tanks almost dry, would key his radio and say 6 words that entered the official Navy record. He would say, "Hell, this is like an old-time turkey shoot down home." The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, the last major carrier battle the Imperial Japanese Navy ever fought. The battle that ended Japan's ability to defend her empire from the air. But before we come back to those 24 hours, and before we come back to that turkey shoot, you have to understand 5 men. You have to understand the American admiral who commanded 15 aircraft carriers into that fight. You have to understand the Japanese admiral who thought he had the advantage and did not. You have to understand the American engineer on Long Island who designed the fighter that broke the Imperial Japanese Navy's back. You have to understand a 25-year-old pilot from East Chicago, Indiana, who shot down 6 Japanese aircraft in 8 minutes and had ammunition left over. And you have to understand a 19-year-old Japanese pilot named Sakio Komatsu, who saw a torpedo coming for his aircraft carrier that morning and made a decision. He is not in the tiles you find when you search for the Battle of the Philippine Sea, but he was there. Let us start with the admiral. His name was Marc Andrew Mitscher. He was born on the 26th of January, 1887, in Hillsboro, Wisconsin. He was 57 years old on the day of the Marianas Turkey Shoot. He had graduated from the Naval Academy in 1910. He had been designated Naval Aviator number 33 in 1916, one of the first 4 flying officers in the United States Navy. He was 5 feet 5 inches tall. He weighed about 100 pounds. He wore a long-billed cap that he had designed himself to keep the sun out of his eyes on carrier decks, and he was almost never seen without. In April of 1942, as a captain, he had commanded the aircraft carrier USS Hornet on the Doolittle raid, launching 16 Army B-25 bombers off his flight deck at extreme range to strike Tokyo. He had commanded Hornet through the Battle of Midway in June of 1942. He had been reassigned to a shore command before Hornet was sunk at the Battle of Santa Cruz in October of 1942. In January of 1944, promoted to Vice Admiral, he had taken command of Task Force 58. Task Force 58 was, at that moment, the most powerful naval force ever assembled in human history. 15 aircraft carriers, 956 aircraft, 7 battleships, 21 cruisers, and 69 destroyers. By the standards of the previous 40 years of naval warfare, this was inconceivable. The Japanese admiral who was going to have to fight this force was named Jisaburo Ozawa. He was 57 years old on the day of the Turkey Shoot. He had been born on the 2nd of October 1886 in Miyazaki Prefecture on the southern Japanese island of Kyushu. He had graduated from the Imperial Japanese Naval Academy at Etajima in 1909 in the same class as Isoroku Yamamoto and Chuichi Nagumo. He was 6 feet 3 inches tall. He was, by a substantial margin, the tallest senior officer in the Imperial Japanese Navy. He was also, by the assessment of most of his contemporaries, the most intellectually gifted naval strategist Japan produced during the Second World War. In March of 1944, after the death of Admiral Minechi Koga in a transport plane crash, Ozawa had taken command of the 1st Mobile Fleet. 9 aircraft carriers, 473 aircraft. He knew, in a way that most senior Japanese naval officers did not, exactly what he was facing. He knew the American industrial base was producing warships faster than Japan could sink them. He knew the American pilot training pipeline was producing aviators at 10 times the rate of the Japanese. He knew Japan could not win a battle of attrition. He had, over the previous year, developed a tactical answer to those problems. He called it the Outrange Doctrine. The Outrange Doctrine was built on a single technical advantage. Japanese carrier-based aircraft carried more fuel than American aircraft. A Japanese Zero fighter in its Model 52 configuration could fly further than an American Hellcat. A Japanese Judy dive bomber could reach 700 miles from its carrier. An American Helldiver could barely make 400. If Ozawa's carriers stayed 400 miles from the American carriers, he could strike them. They could not strike him back. The doctrine was tactically sound. It required 3 things to work. It required his pilots to be able to navigate 700 miles across open ocean, hit a moving target, and return. It required the Japanese airfields on Saipan, Tinian, and Guam to be intact and operational, so his pilots could land and refuel there for the return flight. It required the American task force to hold position while he attacked and not to advance toward him. By the morning of the 19th of June, 1944, none of those 3 requirements were being met. His pilots had, on average, 275 hours of flight time. Pre-war Japanese naval pilots had received 700 hours before combat assignment. Pilots he was about to launch were the survivors of a training pipeline that had been cut by more than half. The airfields at Saipan, Tinian, and Guam had been attacked by Task Force 58 for a full week before the battle. By the morning of the 19th, most of the Japanese aircraft based on those islands were burning wrecks, and the American task force was not 400 miles east of him. It was 240 miles east of him. His pilots would be attacking at closer range than he had planned, which meant, unknown to him, that they would also be inside the effective intercept range of the American radar-directed fighter defense. He was going to walk his pilots into a wall. He did not know it. The wall was named after a man born in Huntington, New York in 1949 years old on the morning of the Turkey Shoot. His name was Leroy Randall Grumman. Everyone called him Roy. He had founded the Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation in 1929 in a rented garage in Baldwin, Long Island. By 1944, he was operating a manufacturing complex at Bethpage, Long Island that employed approximately 40,000 people and produced aircraft 24 hours a day. In June of 1941, 6 months before Pearl Harbor, the Navy had asked Grumman to design a fighter that would replace the F4F Wildcat. The Wildcat was fighting the Japanese Zero to a draw. The Navy wanted something that would win. Roy Grumman assigned the design to a 3-man team. Bill Schwendler was the chief engineer, Bob Hall handled aerodynamics, Dick Hutton handled structures. In the summer of 1942, 6 months into the design work, the United States Navy acquired something that changed everything. On a small Aleutian island called Akutan, an American recovery team had located a nearly intact Japanese Zero that had crashed on landing after the Japanese attack on Dutch Harbor. The Zero was recovered, rebuilt, and flown by Navy test pilots. Every weakness of the Zero was catalogued. The Zero had no armor. The Zero had no self-sealing fuel tanks. The Zero disintegrated in dives above 400 miles per hour. The Zero lost its agility above 20,000 feet. Grumman's engineers designed the Hellcat to attack the Zero on all 4 of those weaknesses. The Hellcat carried 96 pounds of armor plate around the pilot's seat. The Hellcat had self-sealing fuel tanks throughout. The Hellcat could dive at 450 miles per hour without structural failure. The Hellcat performed better than the Zero above 20,000 feet, particularly in a climb. The Hellcat carried 650 caliber Browning M2 machine guns. The prototype flew for the first time on the 26th of June, 1942, 3 weeks after the Battle of Midway. By June of 1944, Grumman had produced 3,500 Hellcats. They had been in combat since the summer of 1943. By the morning of the Marianas Turkey Shoot, the Hellcat's aggregate combat kill ratio against Japanese aircraft across all engagements to that point was approximately 13-1. Pilots who flew them had on average 500 hours of flight training. The Japanese pilots who were about to attack them had 275. That was the fight. The 5th man you need to know was flying one of those Hellcats on the morning of the 19th of June. His name was Alexander Vrashu. He was 25 years old. He had been born on the 2nd of November, 1918 in East Chicago, Indiana. He had graduated from DePauw University in Indiana in 1941. He had earned his wings as a naval aviator in 1942. He was a lieutenant in Fighting Squadron 16, based on the aircraft carrier USS Lexington. He had, before the Turkey Shoot, 12 confirmed kills. He was, by the standards of naval aviation in June of 1944, already a veteran. He was going to double his score in the next 12 hours. The sixth man you need to know was on the flight deck of the Japanese aircraft carrier Taiho at approximately 8:30 in the morning, climbing into the cockpit of a Judy dive bomber. His name was Sakio Komatsu. He was 19 years old. He was one of the pilots that Ozawa had launched in the second wave of the morning strike. He was going to be dead before 9:30. He was going to die in the last 5 minutes of his life, doing some things that historians 80 years later would still argue about. He was going to fly his own aircraft into the path of an American torpedo aimed at the Taiho. He was going to detonate the torpedo with the impact of his aircraft. He was going to save the Taiho for approximately 5 hours. Then the Taiho was going to blow up anyway because of a decision made by an officer he never knew in a part of the ship he had never seen. But we will come back to Sakio Komatsu at approximately 8:30 in the morning on the 19th of June, 1944. Vice Admiral Ozawa launched the first raid of the day. 69 aircraft, 45 Zero fighters, 16 Jill torpedo bombers, 8 Judy dive bombers. They climbed to 20,000 feet and turned east toward a horizon that showed nothing but blue Pacific water. 240 miles east of that horizon, on the bridge of the USS Lexington, Marc Mitscher was watching the radar plot. He was watching 69 blips form up and start heading toward his fleet. He was expecting them. He turned to his aide. He said, "Hey, Rube, the war was about to change in 8 hours, perp 2. By 10:23 in the morning, 220 American Hellcat fighters were airborne over Task Force 58, climbing hard through 20,000 feet. The fighter direction officer aboard the Lexington was Lieutenant Joseph Eggert Jr. He was watching the same radar plot that Mitscher was watching. He had on the plot 69 Japanese blips approaching from the west at 20,000 feet. Above the blips, in his mind, he could see the shape of what was about to happen. His Hellcats had a 5,000-foot altitude advantage on the incoming Japanese formation. They had radar-directed vectors to intercept. They had, in each pair of aircraft, one experienced flight leader and one wingman with at least 200 combat hours. The Japanese pilots did not have any of those things. Eggert began sending intercept vectors. That 10:47 in the morning, 75 miles west of the task force, Hellcat squadrons from Task Group 58.3 made contact with the first Japanese raid. The Japanese fighter cover 45 Zeros was flying at target altitude, 20,000 feet. The Hellcats came down out of the sun. The Hellcats had a 2.5 times weight of fire advantage over the Zeros. 650 caliber machine guns against a single 20mm cannon and 2 rifle caliber weapons. The Zeros could turn tighter at low speeds. The Hellcats did not fight them at low speeds. The Hellcats came down at 370 miles per hour, fired in short bursts as they passed through the Japanese formation, dove away, and climbed back up for another pass. The Japanese pilots did what pilots with 275 hours of flight training do when they are attacked by pilots with 500 hours of flight training. They tried to turn with the Hellcats. Zeros cannot outdive Hellcats. Once the fighters were engaged, the Japanese Jills and Judys were on their own. The Jill was a torpedo bomber. It carried a single 1,500-pound torpedo slung under the belly. Loaded, it flew at 200 miles per hour in level flight. The Judy dive bomber carried a 500-pound bomb. Empty, it was faster. Loaded, it was not. Neither of them was going to outrun a Hellcat. 42 of the 69 aircraft in the first Japanese raid were shot down before they reached the American fleet. 10 made it through the fighter screen. Anti-aircraft fire from the American ships killed most of them. One Judy scored a bomb hit on the battleship South Dakota. That was the only successful strike of the first raid. 69 aircraft launched, 1 hit scored. The Hellcats lost 3 aircraft, 1 American pilot was killed. Kill ratio 14-1. At 11:07 in the morning, 128 miles east of Ozawa's flagship, 128 Japanese aircraft launched from the Taiho, the Shokaku, the Zuikoku, and the Junyo. This was the largest single strike of the day. 48 Zeros, 53 Judy dive bombers, 27 Jill torpedo bombers. It included the best pilots left in Ozawa's fleet. The pilots from Taiho, Shokaku, and Zuikoku were pre-war veterans who had trained for 700 hours before combat. There were not many of them left. They flew this raid. At 11:39, 162 Hellcats intercepted the second raid at a range of approximately 60 miles from the American fleet. Among the Hellcats was Lieutenant Alex Vresiu, 25, of East Chicago, Indiana. His division of 6 Hellcats climbed into the middle of a formation of approximately 50 Judy dive bombers. The Judys were carrying 500-pound bombs. The bombs were on external racks. The Judys were slower than their empty weight would suggest. In 8 minutes of engagement, Alex Vresiu shot down 6 of them. He fired approximately 360 rounds from his 650 caliber machine guns. 60 rounds per kill. The other 5 Hellcats in his division shot down 12 more between them. Vrachey returned to the Lexington in the early afternoon. He circled the ship at low altitude and held up 6 fingers as he passed the drill. Marc Mitscher was on the bridge. Mitscher took off his long-billed cap and waved it at him. The photograph of Alex Vrachey holding up 6 fingers, taken by a Navy photographer as he climbed out of his Hellcat cockpit, was reproduced in the official Navy record and in Life magazine and in every history of the Battle of the Philippine Sea that has ever been written. He was 25 years old. 97 of the 128 aircraft in the second raid were shot down before they reached the American fleet. 15 more were destroyed by anti-aircraft fire on the approach. 16 made it back to Ozawa's carriers. 2 American ships took minor bomb damage. The Hellcats lost 4 aircraft. Kill ratio 28-1. At 9:10 in the morning, in the middle of Ozawa's second raid launch, 160 miles below the surface of the Philippine Sea, another American submarine had been maneuvering into torpedo firing position. Her name was USS Albacore. Her captain was Commander James Blanchard, 39 years old. He had been tracking a formation of Japanese carriers through his periscope for the previous 2 hours. He had identified the largest carrier in the formation as a target of opportunity. At 9:10, he fired a spread of 6 torpedoes. 5 of them missed. One of them was headed directly at the flight deck of the aircraft carrier Taiho, at a firing position that would strike the Taiho approximately amidships on her starboard side. Ensign Sakio Komatsu, 19 years old, was climbing into his Judy dive bomber for the second raid. He had just taken off. He was at approximately 300 feet of altitude, banking to join his formation. He looked down. He saw a white line in the water, tracking the Taiho. He knew what it was. He also knew, at 19 years of age, what the loss of the newest fleet carrier in the Imperial Japanese Navy meant for the war his country was losing. He rolled his aircraft into a dive. He aimed for the torpedo. He hit it. Both the Judy and the torpedo were destroyed on impact, approximately 400 yards short of the Taiho's hull. Ensign Sakio Komatsu was dead at 19. The account of what he had done was radioed from the Taiho to Ozawa within minutes. Ozawa was told. Ozawa's staff logged it. It became part of the Imperial Japanese Navy's official record of the battle. The Taiho was not saved. A second torpedo from the same salvo had struck the Taiho at almost the same moment on her starboard side, forward of the bridge. The damage was minor. The forward gasoline tank was ruptured, but the ship was making 30 knots and continued flight operations. Fumes from the ruptured tank were accumulating in the Taiho's enclosed hangar spaces. The damage control officer looked at the fumes. He made a decision. He opened all the ventilation systems in the ship to disperse the gasoline vapors. Instead of dispersing the vapors, the ventilation system distributed them throughout every compartment of the Taiho. She continued to fight. She continued to launch and recover aircraft. For approximately 5 hours, she operated as if nothing had happened. Ensign Sakio Komatsu, at 19, had died to save her from a torpedo that had already been superseded 5 minutes earlier by a second torpedo that would eventually destroy her from the inside out. He did not know that. The war did not care. At 12:22 in the afternoon, another American submarine was in torpedo firing position on another Japanese carrier. Her name was USS Kavala. Her captain was Commander Herman Kostler, 32 years old. He was on his first war patrol as a commanding officer. His target was the Shokaku. The Shokaku was one of the original 6 aircraft carriers of the Imperial Japanese Navy's Kido Butai. She had launched aircraft at Pearl Harbor. She had launched aircraft at the Battle of the Coral Sea. She had launched aircraft at the Battle of Santa Cruz. She was one of the 2 surviving carriers from the December of 1941 attack force. The other one was Zuikaku. Kostler fired 6 torpedoes at the Shokaku from a range of about 1,200 yards. 3 of them hit the starboard side amidships, directly against the aviation gasoline storage compartments. Fires began immediately. They spread rapidly through the hangar deck. The aviation gasoline manifolds ruptured. Loaded aircraft on the hangar deck caught fire and began explode. Damage control parties tried to reach the fires. The fires reached the aft magazine first. At approximately 14:08 in the afternoon, the aft magazine of the Shokaku detonated. The stern of the ship blew apart. The Shokaku broke in half in the space of about 90 seconds and sank. 1,263 men went with her. Her captain, whose name appears in Japanese records as Hiroshi Matsubara and in some American records as Kanji Ushio, went with her. The Shokaku, veteran of Pearl Harbor, Coral Sea, Santa Cruz, Guadalcanal, and Truk, was on the bottom of the Philippine Sea by 2:15 in the afternoon. Ozawa had lost his second most experienced carrier. He did not yet know he was about to lose the newest one too. At approximately 2:30 in the afternoon aboard the Taiho, someone in an interior compartment somewhere below the flight deck struck a spark. It might have been a switch closing, it might have been a static discharge from a mechanic's boot on a metal deck. The exact point of ignition was never identified because no one who was in that compartment survived to describe it. The spark ignited the gasoline vapors that the ventilation system had spent the previous 5 hours distributing throughout the ship. The Taiho detonated from the inside, the explosion tore her flight deck upward and outward. The center of the ship collapsed inward. Fires spread through every compartment simultaneously. Vice Admiral Ozawa was on the bridge when it happened. He was thrown to the deck by the concussion. His staff got him off the bridge and into a small boat that took him across to the heavy cruiser, Haguro. Approximately 1,650 men died aboard the Taiho. Her captain, Tomozo Kikuchi, was among them. The Taiho, commissioned in March of 1944, sank on her first combat operation. She had been in the Imperial Japanese Navy for 3 months and 8 days. At the same hour, the third and fourth waves of Ozawa's morning strike, launched hours earlier from carriers that no longer existed, were flying over empty ocean looking for targets they could not find. The third wave, 47 aircraft, had been given the wrong search coordinates. Only 7 of them found the American fleet, none scored hits, 7 were shot down. The fourth wave, 82 aircraft, was designed to attack the American fleet, land on Guam to refuel, and launch again the next day. Guam was covered in Hellcats. Approximately 30 of the 82 aircraft in the fourth wave were shot down in the landing pattern over Guam by Hellcat squadrons from Task Group 58.2, which had been waiting for them. Most of the rest ran out of fuel and ditched in the Pacific between Ozawa's fleet and Guam. By 6 in the evening on the 19th of June, 1944, of the 373 aircraft that Ozawa had launched that day, fewer than 100 were still airborne, still fueled, and still combat capable. 2 of his carriers were on the bottom. The heart of his air group was gone. His experienced pilots, the ones who had trained for 700 hours before the war, the veterans of Pearl Harbor and Midway and the Solomons, were dead. The pilots who would replace them, if they could be replaced at all, would be coming out of a training pipeline that gave them 90 hours in the air. 90 hours. That evening, as Hellcat pilots returned to their carriers and refueled and rearmed and slept where they could find space, Lieutenant Ziggy Neff of Fighting Squadron 16, returning to the Lexington in the last light of the day, keyed his radio and said, "Hell, this is like an old-time turkey shoot down home." The battle had a name. The night of the 19th of June passed quietly. Ozawa withdrew west. He believed he still had options. He believed Japanese aircraft on Guam and other bases could rejoin the fight in the morning. He had lost track of what was happening at Guam. At Guam, Hellcats were burning everything that could fly. On the morning of the 20th of June, Task Force 58 steamed west, looking for Ozawa's remaining ships. American search aircraft flew all day. They found nothing. At 3:40 in the afternoon, a search Avenger from the aircraft carrier Enterprise finally reported the Japanese fleet. They were 370 miles west of Task Force 58. The sun was going to set at approximately 1830. Marc Mitscher looked at the range, 370 miles. He looked at the sunset time. He looked at the fuel state of the aircraft that would have to fly the mission. A carrier airstrike at 370 miles was, by peacetime training standards, an impossible mission. The aircraft would launch, fly to the target, attack, and turn for home. They would run out of fuel before they reached the American fleet on the return flight, unless they were exceptionally efficient with fuel management, unless the wind was favorable, unless they could find the ships again in the dark, unless nothing went wrong. If Mitscher gave the launch order, some of the pilots he was launching would never come back. If he did not give the launch order, Ozawa's fleet would escape, and the Japanese Navy would still have the ships it needed to defend Formosa and the Philippines. Marc Mitscher had spent his entire life flying carrier aircraft. He knew what he was about to ask his pilots to do. He gave the launch order, he turned to his flag captain and said, "Launch them." At 1624, 216 aircraft launched from Task Force 58, and they turned west into the setting sun. Pop 3 at approximately 1820 in the evening on the 20th of June 1944, 216 American aircraft came out of the sunset over Vice Admiral Ozawa's fleet. They attacked immediately. There was no time for coordination. The pilots knew they had one pass before dark and one pass to make count. The aircraft carrier Hayo, 24,000 tons, converted from a passenger liner before the war, took 2 torpedoes and 1 bomb. Aviation fuel ignited on her hangar deck. Fires spread to her forward magazine. At approximately 1832, 12 minutes after the attack began, the Hayo blew up. She broke apart in the water and sank in less than half an hour. 250 men died with her. Her captain, Suo-u, was among them. The remaining Japanese carriers, Zuikaku, Junyo, Ryuho, Chiyoda, took bomb damage but stayed afloat. Battleships and cruisers were hit. 2 Japanese tankers were sunk. The attack lasted 20 minutes. The sun set at 1832 when the last American aircraft turned east into full darkness. 370 miles from home, they had approximately 90 minutes of fuel remaining. They needed 2 hours. At 19:30, on the bridge of the Lexington, Marc Mitscher stood in the darkness, listening to the fragmentary radio calls of pilots who were lost, low on fuel, and trying to find the fleet. He had, in the previous 8 hours, ordered a launch he knew would cost him men. He had the task force under wartime blackout. Every ship was running dark. That was standard doctrine at night in a combat zone. If he turned on the lights, every ship in the task force would become visible for 100 miles in every direction. If any Japanese submarine was within that range, it would have a shooting gallery. If he did not turn on the lights, his pilots would die trying to land on carriers they could not see. He looked at the darkness. He gave the order, turn on the lights. He said it once quietly, without emphasis. The signal went out from the Lexington to every ship in Task Force 58. Running lights came on, truck lights, deck lights, wake lights on the destroyers, searchlights pointed straight up from every large ship. A combat photographer named Norman Hatch, who was on the deck of the Lexington that night, described it in his notes as looking like Christmas trees blooming on the ocean, one after another, all the way to the horizon. Every Japanese submarine in the Western Pacific could have seen Task Force 58 from 100 miles away. Marc Mitscher had accepted that risk because his pilots were in the dark. The aircraft that could still make it home began coming in. Some landed on their assigned carriers, some landed on whichever carrier they saw first, some ditched alongside destroyers and were pulled out of the water by whaleboats sent to find them. Some ran out of fuel over open water and were never seen again. Approximately 80 American aircraft were lost that night, most of them to fuel exhaustion. 49 pilots were pulled out of the Pacific by American destroyers over the next 12 hours. Approximately 50 American aircrew were dead by dawn. They had helped sink a Japanese aircraft carrier. By the morning of the 21st of June, 1944, Vice Admiral Ozawa's mobile fleet was withdrawing to the west with 3 of its 9 aircraft carriers on the bottom of the Philippine Sea, and its air group reduced to less than 1/3 of its starting strength. The Marianas Turkey Shoot was over. Ozawa submitted his resignation to Combined Fleet Headquarters on the 22nd of June. He cited failure of mission. Marianas invasion had succeeded. Japanese naval air power had been destroyed. Admiral Somi Toyoda, the commander-in-chief of the Combined Fleet, refused the resignation. There was no one to replace him with. Ozawa remained in command. He knew, and Toyoda knew, that the Combined Fleet was finished as a carrier-striking force. 4 months later, at the Battle of Leyte Gulf, in October of 1944, Ozawa took the remaining Japanese aircraft carriers, Zuikaku, Zuiho, Chitose, and Kyoda, north to act as a decoy. He knew they would all be sunk. That was the mission. Draw the American Third Fleet north, away from the American landing at Leyte, so that the Japanese battleship force under Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita could get through the San Bernardino Strait and attack the American beachhead. The decoy worked. Admiral William Halsey took Third north to catch Ozawa's carriers. All 4 of them were sunk. The Zuikaku, the last surviving aircraft carrier from the Pearl Harbor attack force, went down on the 25th of October, 1944. Her captain, Kaizuka Takeo, went down with her. Ozawa survived. He was pulled out of the water by the light cruiser Oyodo. He retired from the Imperial Japanese Navy in November of 1945. He lived quietly in Tokyo for 21 more years. He refused most interviews. He wrote no memoir. In 1965, at the age of 79, he agreed to speak once to a single Japanese historian. He was asked what he had understood in June of 1944 about the Turkey Shoot. He said, "After that, we knew the air war was over." He died in Tokyo on the 9th of November 1966. He was 80 years old. Alex Vashiu came home from the war with 19 confirmed aerial kills. He remained in the Navy until 1964 and retired as a commander. He became a banker in California. He died on the 29th of January 2015 at the age of 96 in Danville, California. He was at the time of his death the longest-lived American Navy ace of the Second World War. He talked about the Turkey Shoot for the rest of his life. He said in interviews given in old age that he thought often about the Japanese pilots he had shot down that morning. He said they had been very young and very brave and very poorly trained. He said they had not stood a chance. David McCampbell, the commander of Air Group 15 aboard the USS Essex, went from 7 kills at Marianas to a career total of 34. On the 24th of October 1944, over Leyte Gulf, McCampbell and his wingman Roy Rushing intercepted a formation of approximately 60 Japanese aircraft attacking Task Force 38. They attacked alone. Nobody else in their squadron could reach the interception in time. McCampbell shot down 9 enemy aircraft in a single mission. The record has never been broken. He received the Medal of Honor from President Harry Truman in January of 1945. He died on the 30th of June, 1996, at the age of 86 in West Palm Beach, Florida. He is buried at Arlington. Roy Grumman ran the Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation through the rest of the war. Grumman produced 12,275 Hellcats before production ended in November of 1945. Grumman's fighters accounted for 5,163 enemy aircraft kills during the Second World War. That was more Japanese aircraft than were shot down by all other American fighter types in the Pacific War combined. The kill-to-loss ratio was 19-1. Roy Grumman lived to see his company build the F-14 Tomcat and the Apollo lunar module. He died at his home in Manhasset, New York, on the 4th of October, 1982, at the age of 87. The Bethpage plant on Long Island, where the Hellcats had been built, closed in 1994. Marc Mitscher continued to command Task Force 58 through the invasions of Iwo Jima and Okinawa in 1945. His pilots sank the battleship Yamato on the 7th of April, 1945, when the Yamato steamed south on a suicide mission to strike the American fleet off Okinawa. Mitscher was promoted to Admiral in 1946. He commanded the 8th Fleet in the Atlantic. He commanded the Atlantic Fleet. He died on the 3rd of February, 1947, at the Norfolk Naval Base in Virginia of a heart attack while still on active duty. He was 60 years old. He is buried at Arlington National Cemetery. The United States Navy commissioned an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer named USS Mitscher in 1994. She is still in service today, somewhere in this country tonight, in an attic, in a small town, or in a shoebox on a closet shelf in a house whose owners no longer remember exactly why the shoebox is there. Is a photograph of a young Navy aviator in a khaki uniform, dated somewhere in the summer of 1944, standing in front of an F6F Hellcat with kill marks painted on the nose. Some of those young pilots came home. Some of them did not. The Hellcat they were standing in front of was designed in a rented office in Bethpage, Long Island, in 1941 by 3 engineers who never flew combat. The Hellcat they were standing in front of killed more Japanese aircraft than any other American fighter of the entire Pacific War. Not because it was the fastest airplane, not because it was the most agile airplane, not because it was the most beautiful airplane. Because Roy Grumman and Bill Schwendler and Bob Hall and Dick Hutton had decided in the summer of 1941, 6 months before the war began, that the most important thing a fighter could do was bring that pilot home. Armor around the cockpit, self-sealing fuel tanks, 6 machine guns that could reach out at 400 yards. The Hellcats brought their pilots home. They also killed a lot of 19-year-old Japanese pilots who did not come home. Sakio Komatsu was one of them. He died on the morning of the 19th of June, 1944, at 19 years of age, to save the aircraft carrier Taiho from a torpedo that had already been superseded by another torpedo he did not see. His name is not on any American memorial, it is on a Japanese one. He was one of 645 men who died in 24 hours in the middle of the Philippine Sea, so that an empire that could no longer replace its trained pilots could postpone, by a few months, an ending it had been unable to avoid since Yamamoto had briefed the cabinet in the fall of 1941. The empire that had ruled the Pacific in June of 1942 discovered in 24 hours in June of 1944 that no empire ever rules forever. Marc Mitscher, on the bridge of the Lexington on the morning of the 19th of June, had said it in one phrase. Hey Rube, 2 words, old carnival slang from a boyhood in Wisconsin. They meant, everybody get into this fight, right now, as fast as you can. 220 American Hellcat pilots did. 20 of them did not come home. The rest did. The ones who did not come home are the reason the rest of us did. And the Hellcat, designed by 3 men in a rented garage in Long Island in 1941, was the airplane that brought them.